For thousands of years, the Galactic Council ruled the stars with quiet authority. Their word was law. Their fleets, though small, represented order. Their diplomacy had outlasted wars, uprisings, and rebellions. In their eyes, any species that entered their domain would naturally submit, just as countless others had before. After all, what creature would dare challenge 1,000 generations of certainty? Now, imagine this council as the invisible laws that govern the empath's life. From childhood, the empath is trained under similar authority, not with fleets and starships, but with words, expectations, and subtle punishments. Be kind. Don't make trouble. Put others first. These are the edicts of the council, carved into the empath's psyche. Carl Jung called this outer mask the persona, the carefully crafted identity we present to the world so that society accepts us. For the empath, the persona is a polished shield of politeness and self-sacrifice. It keeps the peace. It keeps them safe. But here is the paradox. Just as the Galactic Council maintained its dominance, not by strength, but by tradition, the empath's survival strategy rests on compliance. The empath learns that harmony comes at the cost of silence. They are praised for yielding, rewarded for disappearing. Over time, this conditioning becomes second nature, like Captain Zephyr Zeer's diplomatic fleet. 12 proud cruisers ready to meet any anomaly with protocol and politeness. The empath deploys charm, patience, and over-accommodation whenever conflict arises. Yet beneath the council's veneer of stability lay an unspoken truth. Their power was untested, and beneath the empath's calm exterior lies the same secret. Jung warned that the persona, if worn too long, becomes a prison. It hides the shadow, the forbidden self that hungers for authenticity, for power, for freedom. The empath's shadow is the Titan-class warship waiting in the dark, silent, immense, and unacknowledged. And so the empath continues, year after year, orbiting within a system where their worth is defined by their usefulness to others. They grow exhausted, resentful, but they dare not rebel. Like the council watching the empty void of space, they believe their rule will last forever. But what happens when a signal appears? What happens when the void stirs with the presence of something vast and undeniable? What happens when the empath, for the first time, refuses to play the role assigned to them? That is the moment the galaxy shifts, and it is only the beginning. First contact with the shadow self. Out in the quiet void, the Galactic Council's monitoring stations detect something impossible. A vessel so massive, so alien, that it dwarfs their understanding of warfare. Over 15 kilometers long, bristling with weapons, radiating power like a fortress forged from nightmares, the UES Ragnarok enters their space. This is no mere ship. It is a challenge to everything the Council believes about order, power, and control. In the same way, the empath's life eventually brings them into contact with their own hidden warship, the Shadow. For years, it slumbered beneath layers of politeness, hidden beneath the smiling mask of the persona. Carl Jung described the Shadow as the repository of all that society tells us to suppress. Our anger, our ambition, our hunger for freedom, even our capacity to say no. For the empath, this shadow takes the form of a voice inside that whispers, "Enough." When the Council's fleet intercepts the Ragnarok, they move with confidence. They demand compliance, insist upon inspection, and expect obedience. This moment mirrors the first time others encounter the empath's refusal. A friend asks for yet another favor. A partner demands endless emotional labor. A boss assumes unquestioned sacrifice. But this time, The empath hesitates, and then, for the first time, they say, no. Like Captain Marcus Chen, standing unyielding on the Ragnarok's bridge, the empath refuses the inspection. They refuse to surrender their autonomy. And in that instant, the atmosphere changes. The Council's cruisers tense, shields flare to life, weapons prepare to fire. For the empath, those weapons are not plasma cannons. They are guilt trips, accusations of selfishness, manipulations designed to drag them back into submission. Jung, in Ion, reminds us that confronting the shadow is not a polite negotiation. It is a confrontation. The empath's refusal is not received as strength, but as rebellion, even betrayal. The world does not applaud. It trembles, just as the Council views the Ragnarok not as a sovereign entity, but as a threat. The empath's world views their newfound boundaries as dangerous, destabilizing, and yet, this confrontation is necessary. Without it, there can be no integration, no authenticity. The empath cannot become whole until the shadow steps into the light. But here is the twist. This first contact is not the end. It is the beginning of war. For once, the shadow reveals itself. It cannot be forgotten. And like the Council staring at the impossible scale of the Ragnarok, those around the empath realize something terrifying. This power was always there. The explosion of suppressed power. The Council expected submission. For 10,000 years, their law had been unchallenged. When their cruisers surrounded the Ragnarok, they believed the human vessel would bow to pressure. That diplomacy or intimidation would prevail as it always had. Instead, in a single flash of light, the Council's illusion shattered. A point defense weapon, dismissed by the Council as too weak for real combat, vaporized one of their proud cruisers in an instant. Silence followed, a silence that was not peace, but shock. This moment is the empath's first boundary expressed in action. For years, they have carried resentment beneath their carefully composed exterior. They have said yes when they wanted to scream no. They have smiled when they wanted to cry. But repression has a cost. Like pressurized gas in a sealed chamber, it builds until it finds release. And when it erupts, it is not subtle. Psychologist Alice Miller, in The Drama of the Gifted Child, explains how individuals conditioned to suppress their true emotions eventually release them with volcanic force. What looks like sudden rebellion is, in truth, the inevitable eruption of a lifetime of silence. Research in the Journal of Personality, Oakland and Lane, 2017, echoes this. Chronic self-suppression is strongly linked to emotional blowouts, often shocking both the individual and those around them. The empath's first explosion is not always graceful. It might be a sudden refusal, a storm of anger, or the shocking collapse of a relationship long taken for granted. To others, it appears disproportionate, even destructive. But this is because the empath has been storing years, perhaps decades, of unexpressed truth. Like the Ragnarok's point defense blast, small in mechanism but devastating in effect, their boundary is underestimated until it strikes. Cinematic echoes of this moment can be found in Whiplash, where the quiet, compliant student finally erupts with uncompromising power in his drumming, or in Joker, where years of suppression boil over into terrifying autonomy. These depictions remind us, when the silenced voice finds expression, it does not whisper, it roars. And just as the Council trembles at humanity's strike, those around the empath are left unsettled, even fearful. They realize this person they believe to control was never truly weak, but restrained. The explosion is only the first shot. The war has only begun. Humanity's technological supremacy as inner strength. The council could dismiss a single strike as luck. Perhaps the humans had a hidden trick, a fluke of engineering. But then the scans came in. The Ragnarok was not just armed, it was built for war on a scale the council had never conceived. Layer upon layer of shielding, redundancy in every system, weapons capable of erasing fleets. Even more disturbing, reports of Dyson rings in the human home system, massive constructs siphoning the power of entire stars. The humans did not depend on fragile alliances or borrowed energy. They had become self-sustaining. This moment mirrors the empath's shift after their first explosive boundary. At first, others believe it is temporary, a phase, a tantrum, a moment of rebellion. But then the truth emerges. The empath has tapped into something deeper than anger. They have found their own energy source, no longer draining themselves in the endless work of keeping others happy. They begin to reclaim their time, their focus, their vitality. This is their Dyson ring, the ability to harness energy from within rather than from external validation. Ernest Becker, in The Denial of Death, argued that real strength comes when we stop living for approval and confront our mortality. The empath, once terrified of rejection, begins to accept that losing relationships or disappointing others is not death. In fact, it is liberation. What once felt impossible, saying no, setting limits, standing firm, now becomes a renewable source of life. This phase is rarely dramatic in appearance, but it is staggering in scale. The empath may begin exercising for their own health, not to please others. They may pursue long-buried passions, build creative projects, or establish routines that strengthen them mentally and physically. To outsiders who depended on their compliance, this transformation feels threatening. Just as the council viewed Dyson rings with dread, proof that humanity could outproduce them forever. Those who once fed off the empath's endless giving now sense their supply has been cut off. Film echoes of this stage can be found in Gattaca, where hidden strength, carefully cultivated, overwhelms a society that underestimated it, or in The Matrix, when Neo finally stops running and realizes the source of his power lies within. The empath has crossed a threshold. They are no longer surviving through appeasement. They are thriving through sovereignty. And with this realization, the real crisis begins. Not for the empath, but for the world that can no longer control them. Council's crisis of authority, the destruction of a cruiser, might have been dismissed as a catastrophe of poor tactics. The revelation of Dyson rings and industrial might could have been explained away as an anomaly. But now, as intelligence streamed in, the council could no longer deny the truth. Humanity had surpassed them, not just in weapons, but in production, in organization, in the very will to survive. Suddenly, the council chambers were no longer filled with confidence, but with fear. Their 10,000-year supremacy trembled in doubt. This mirrors the empath's world when their transformation becomes undeniable. At first, loved ones, colleagues, or partners may brush aside their refusal to please as temporary rebellion. But as boundaries grow firm, as new habits take root, as energy flows inward rather than outward, the old order begins to panic. Questions emerge. Who do you think you are? Why are you changing? Why can't you just go back to the way things were? These questions are not curiosity. They are weapons of guilt. The empath, having built strength, now faces the backlash of authority, the subtle and overt attempts to reassert control. Friends may brand them selfish. Families may play the martyr, insisting they are being abandoned. Romantic partners may weaponize love itself. If you cared, you'd do this for me. Psychological research validates this crisis point. A 2016 study by Flett and colleagues in the Journal of Psychopathology and Behavioral Assessment revealed that individuals breaking free from perfectionism and people-pleasing face not only internal guilt, but external pressure to maintain old patterns. The system that benefited from their compliance resists their independence. Jung himself saw this resistance as inevitable. In his Red Book, he wrote of inner figures who resisted transformation, voices that begged him to stay small, safe, obedient. The empath's outer world behaves in the same way. It mirrors those inner voices, demanding submission to maintain its own equilibrium. This stage is painful. It is the midway tip, the moment when guilt and fear weigh heavier than freedom. Many empaths relapse here, returning to compliance to silence the backlash. But the few who endure discover something profound. Authority's anger is proof of their awakening. Just as the Council's fury revealed the depth of humanity's threat, the world's resistance reveals the empath's growing sovereignty. The storm is not a sign to retreat. It is a sign that the old order is dying. The Inner Council meeting. In the vast halls of the Galactic Council, the greatest minds of 1,000 species convened in emergency session. The air was thick with unease. Should they strike the humans before their power spread further? Should they negotiate, even if it meant humiliation? Or should they retreat, protecting their fragile empire at the cost of pride? The Council had faced rebellions before, but never an enemy who so decisively overturned the very logic of their rule. Every option seemed catastrophic. Inside the empath's psyche, a similar council is called. After the first boundary is drawn and the backlash begins, inner voices gather to deliberate. The people pleaser within insists, go back, say yes, make peace before you lose everyone. The critic snarls, you've gone too far, you're selfish, you'll end up alone. The wounded child whispers, if you don't serve, no one will love you. And, from deep within, the shadow now counters, enough, this is survival, this is truth. Carl Jung knew these voices intimately. In his Red Book, he transcribed dialogues with the figures of his inner world, demands, bargains, threats, and doubts, all competing for control. He called this process active imagination, the confrontation with the multiplicity of the psyche. For the empath, this inner council is no metaphor. It feels like a war room where every choice threatens devastation. History echoes the same trial. Consider Socrates standing before the Athenian court. He was offered the chance to save himself, if only he would submit, apologize, compromise. Instead, he chose truth over compliance, even at the cost of death. His defiance illustrates the empath's dilemma: preserve the comfort of others by betraying oneself, or endure exile by remaining authentic. Films such as The Dark Knight explore similar inner debates. Batman torn between the demands of a city and the call of his deeper purpose. Likewise, the empath feels the unbearable pull of conflicting loyalties. This stage is where many falter. Thus, inner council's pressure can feel overwhelming, its verdict almost predetermined. Return to submission, preserve harmony. Yet those who endure this tribunal discover a secret. Doubt and conflict are not signs of weakness. They are evidence of transformation in motion. Just as the Galactic Council's endless debate revealed humanity's unshakable presence, the empath's inner trial reveals that the shadow cannot be erased. It is here to stay, and its voice will not be silenced. Emergence of the independent self. The Council's debates dragged on, but in the human camp, there was no hesitation. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the assembled fleets and spoke with chilling clarity. "We do not recognize your authority. We are sovereign. We will not submit." In that moment, the illusion of the Council's supremacy collapsed. Humanity was not another subject species. It was an equal, perhaps even a superior, demanding coexistence on its own terms. This moment mirrors the empath's emergence as an independent self. After the explosions of anger, after the battles of guilt and backlash, comes a quieter but far more profound declaration. "I will live by my own law." This is not a tantrum. This is sovereignty. Friedrich Nietzsche foresaw this transformation in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where he described the Overman, the individual who creates values rather than borrowing them. The empath, once chained by the demands of others, now realizes that the power to define life has always been within. They no longer ask, "Am I good enough for them?" Instead, they ask, "Is this true for me?" Psychologically, this is the beginning of individuation, Jung's term for the process of becoming whole. To individuate is to integrate shadow, persona, and true self into a coherent identity that no longer seeks external approval as its fuel. It is to recognize, as Jung wrote, that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Of course, sovereignty does not arrive without cost. To stand independent is to invite suspicion, resentment, even exile. Those who once benefited from the empath's compliance may view this declaration as betrayal. In the Council's eyes, humanity was not brave but dangerous, and in the empath's circle, independence may be misread as selfishness, arrogance, or cruelty. But here lies the paradox. By refusing to please everyone, the empath becomes truly capable of authentic love. Only when their yes carries the weight of a possible no can their compassion be trusted as real. Cinematic echoes of this shift appear in V for Vendetta, where the masked revolutionary declares sovereignty against a corrupt state, not for destruction's sake, but for the possibility of truth. The empath, too, unmasks. They refuse to be defined by borrowed laws. The Council's authority cracks. The empath's prison dissolves. A sovereign self has stepped into the world, and nothing will ever be the same again. The social fallout. The Council chambers erupted into chaos. Entire star systems, sensing weakness, began to defect. Some worlds demanded independence. Others secretly courted humanity, drawn to its promise of protection and strength. The empire that had stood for 10,000 years was splintering before their eyes. For the Council, humanity was not just an enemy. It was a gravitational force, pulling allies and enemies alike into a new orbit. So, it is with the empath who finally declares sovereignty. Once their independence is spoken aloud, the world around them shifts in ways they could not predict. Some relationships collapse instantly. Those who depended on their endless giving retreat in anger, resentment, or silence. Others accuse them of betrayal. "You've changed. You're not the person I thought you were." Still others, surprisingly, are drawn closer, relieved to see authenticity, where once there was only performance. This stage is painful because it reveals what was hidden all along. Many connections were not built on mutual respect, but on silent exploitation. The empath's energy had been a resource, one taken for granted. Now, with boundaries in place, those who cannot adapt fall away. The empath experiences grief, even guilt, as once familiar faces turn cold. But in that grief lies clarity. True connection can never be based on erasure. Sophocles' Antigone offers a haunting parallel. Antigone chooses to defy the king's edict in order to honor her deeper truth. In doing so, she isolates herself. provoking the wrath of authority and the abandonment of allies. Her tragedy mirrors the empath's trial. The price of authenticity is often exile. Films like The Fountain echo this bittersweet transformation, loss intertwined with transcendence. The empath learns that to live authentically is to endure the deaths of false relationships so that genuine ones may be born. And here lies the paradox. While some relationships crumble, others evolve. A friend who once took advantage may step back and return with respect. A partner who bristled at boundaries may learn to love more honestly. New alliances form, built not on compliance, but on recognition of the empath's true self. The council viewed defecting worlds as betrayal, but for those worlds, it was liberation. Likewise, the empath discovers that while some mourn their independence, others celebrate it. The fallout is not the end. It is the necessary purge before rebirth. The rebirth of boundaries. The Council's intelligence networks brought chilling reports. Humanity's fleet was multiplying. What had begun as a single Titan-class warship was now an entire armada. 37 confirmed dreadnoughts, each bristling with weapons, and more under construction. It became clear that the Ragnarok had not been an anomaly. It had been a herald. Humanity was building a system of power that no empire could ignore. Each vessel was not just a weapon, but a boundary, an announcement to the galaxy. This far, no further. For the empath, this stage is equally transformative. After the first eruption of anger and the painful fallout of lost relationships, they begin to realize that power cannot survive in chaos. Saying no once is not enough. Boundaries must become a system, clear, consistent, reinforced. Just as humanity did not rely on one ship, but on a fleet, the empath learns to construct multiple defenses across every domain of life. At work, they may begin refusing projects that exploit their time. In friendships, they may stop absorbing constant drama. In family, they may decline the role of caretaker when it threatens their own health. Each act is a new warship, a structure that protects their dignity and conserves their energy. Robert Keegan, in The Evolving Self, describes this as moving into a higher stage of development, no longer defined by the approval of others, but by one's own authored identity. The empath, who once dissolved into the needs of others, now operates with self-created principles, a coherent strategy of existence. This rebirth of boundaries is often misunderstood. To outsiders, it may look cold, even aggressive. But boundaries are not walls meant to isolate. They are ships meant to defend. They allow the empath to decide when and how to give, ensuring that generosity flows from abundance rather than depletion. Cinematic parallels can be found in Gattaca, where the protagonist systematically trains his body and mind, creating resilience that no authority can dismantle. Or in The Matrix, when Neo stops dodging bullets and realizes he can bend reality itself, no longer reacting, but designing. The empath's life now takes on a new architecture. Where once they floated in orbit around others, now they build constellations of their own choosing. Each boundary is not just protection, it is liberation, the scaffolding of a sovereign self. And yet, as the fleet grows, so too does the resistance. The old order does not crumble quietly. The death of the old order. 6 months after the first clash, the Council could no longer deny reality. 17 star systems had declared independence. Entire fleets defected or were destroyed in minutes by human firepower. The Council's vast authority, once seen as eternal, was disintegrating. The halls that had echoed with certainty for 10,000 years now rang with panic. The old order was dying. For the empath, this is the moment when their former identity finally collapses. The mask of the ever-pleasing caretaker, the unending giver, the silent peacekeeper, once believed essential for survival, crumbles into dust. At first, this collapse feels like destruction. Relationships may be severed. Old communities may no longer feel like home. The empath may even look into the mirror and wonder, who am I without this mask? But destruction is often the prelude to rebirth. Carl Jung taught that transformation requires the death of the persona, the socially approved mask, so the authentic self can emerge. To cling to the mask is to live in illusion. To let it die is to step into truth. The cost is not just external. Internally, the empath feels waves of grief. The habits of self-erasure are deeply ingrained, and their collapse can feel like betrayal of one's very identity. Here, the empath faces what Ernest Becker, in The Denial of Death, described as the terror of freedom, the realization that life lived authentically carries both risk and responsibility. Cinematic echoes of this collapse appear in Apocalypse Now, where the journey up the river ends not in triumph, but in the revelation of madness and rebirth. The empath, too, finds that the destruction of the old order is disorienting, terrifying, yet profoundly necessary. This stage is also where others begin to recoil most fiercely. Just as the Council raged at humanity's rise, those invested in the empath's old compliance may lash out. Accusations of selfishness, abandonment, or cruelty often reach their peak here, yet their fury is not proof of the empath's failure. It is proof of their transformation. The death of the old order is not the end of the story. It is the clearing of the battlefield, the burning away of illusion. From the ashes, something immense and unstoppable is about to rise, the Leviathan of selfhood. The Council had thought the Ragnarok was the pinnacle of human achievement, but 6 months later, intelligence confirmed something even more terrifying. The construction of the Leviathan, a dreadnought stretching 37 kilometers in length, capable of planetary assault. Compared to this, the Council's largest ships looked like toys. The message was unmistakable. Humanity was not just powerful, it was evolving into something beyond comprehension. This stage represents the empath's ultimate transformation. The first no was a spark. The early boundaries were the fleet, but now comes the integration of everything that had been hidden, fragmented, or denied. Jung called this individuation, the union of shadow, persona, and true self into a whole that is no longer divided. The empath who once feared rejection now radiates an authority that cannot be taken away. Their presence itself is the Leviathan, immense, undeniable, unyielding. Ian McGilchrist, in The Master and His Emissary, speaks of the balance between the two hemispheres of the brain, reason and intuition, control and creativity. The integrated empath mirrors this balance. They are no longer trapped in endless service, nor consumed by reactive anger. They carry both compassion and ferocity, boundaries and openness, power and tenderness. From the outside, this transformation appears intimidating. Just as the Council trembled at the Leviathan, those around the empath may feel unsettled. They no longer know how to predict or manipulate this person. Old tricks, guilt, pressure, exploitation no longer penetrate. The empath has grown beyond the reach of such tactics. Their shields hold. Their weapons fire when necessary. Their autonomy is complete. Cinematic echoes of this awakening can be found in Arrival, where humanity learns a language that rewires perception itself. transforming weakness into transcendent strength. Or in 2001, A Space Odyssey, where the fragile human Voyager evolves into the Star Child, vast and luminous. The empath, too, has stepped into a form no one expected, a sovereign being, at once terrifying and awe-inspiring. This stage is not about domination. The Leviathan is not built merely to destroy, but to make war impossible. The empath's integrated self does not exist to crush others, but to ensure that their existence can never again be erased. The Leviathan has risen, the empath is whole, and now the universe must adjust to their gravity, living as the sovereign empath. When the Leviathan entered Council space, there was no battle. There didn't need to be. Its sheer presence altered the balance of power. The Council could rage, posture, or resist, but they knew the truth. The age of their unquestioned rule was over. Humanity was no longer asking for permission to exist. It was living as a sovereign power. So it is with the empath who has completed this inner war. They no longer need to explain their boundaries, nor justify their choices, nor beg for understanding. Their life itself becomes the statement, I belong to myself. Their sovereignty is not loud, but it is immovable. Like the Leviathan, it exerts gravity without effort. This stage is not about cutting ties with everyone. It is about coexisting on new terms. Those who can adapt learn to engage with the empath respectfully, honoring their autonomy. Those who cannot drift away, just as star systems once loyal to the Council align themselves with humanity instead. Sovereignty creates a new orbit, and relationships either recalibrate or dissolve. Philosophically, this stage mirrors the final movement of Jung's individuation process. The empath no longer lives divided between persona and shadow, between false compliance and hidden rage. They live integrated, able to give authentically because they no longer give compulsively. Their compassion is stronger, not weaker, because it flows from freedom rather than fear. Cultural echoes of this final phase appear in Blade Runner 2049, when Kate chooses to act not out of programming, but out of self-authored meaning, even at great cost. Sovereignty is lonely at times, but it is real. And authenticity, however isolating, is the foundation of genuine connection. To the outside world, the sovereign empath may appear intimidating, just as the Leviathan unsettled the Council. But this intimidation is simply the recognition of untouchable wholeness. They are no longer a resource to be drained, a vessel to be emptied, a mask to be used. They are a self. And so we arrive at the final paradox. The empath, who once feared losing love, discovers that only by ceasing to please everyone can they love authentically. The day they stop erasing themselves is the day they truly exist. The universe itself shifts when an empath claims their sovereignty. The old order collapses, the masks dissolve, and a new gravity emerges. The empath does not ask permission. They do not seek approval. They simply are, and that presence is enough to reorganize the stars.